Hello, Elijah. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me? I'm not hearing you. Okay. Finding the connection here. Let's see. Oh, you're muted. It shows you as muted on my screen. Okay, you're unmuted now. Can you hear me? You hear me, but I can't hear you. Okay, is my audio misconfigured? Entirely possible. Let's try it this way. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. You are speaking, but I am not hearing you. You're also horribly backlit, by the way, because you're right in front of a window. I don't know if there's any way you can at least close the window or move around. Always challenging to find the connection. Make the connection. Testing 1, 2, 3. Volume level. Interesting. Why is that? Hello. Microphone is bouncing up and down, which is odd. All right, I'm not picking up any. My little Zoom sensor here doesn't seem to be showing any audio levels coming in, so I don't know if there's something else going on with your audio. Let's try it without the headphones, see if that makes a difference. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing. Try your headphones. Testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me? I can see you. Yes, you can hear me. Good. I cannot hear you at all, and I don't know why. My Zoom thing doesn't seem to be receiving a signal from your audio. I don't know if that's meaningful or not. Keep trying. That's fine. Apologies for those of you watching. I'll see if I can trim this out of the YouTube video. If not, you get to see the sausage being made as usual. All right, plan B, trying the AirPods. Okay. You want to try it directly on the built-in microphone just to see if we even hear anything at all? If the audio is not great, at least we can start the connection. Testing 1, 2, 3. Interesting. When I talk, the little microphone and the participant's view bounces up and down and then keeps bouncing for a little bit after I stop talking. And your little microphone doesn't seem to be saying anything yet. Still not hearing anything. If this fails utterly, we will cancel and go to plan B, which is doing just a phone conversation. Send you a dial in. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Still not hearing anything. And not seeing anything on the little audio bumper here. So incoming call. Hey, Elijah. Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay. Still not hearing anything. And not even seeing the little microphone bumper on Zoom showing a signal. Nope, not hearing a word you're saying.
Hold on.
Oh, wait, I just heard that.
You heard me say that?
I heard you say that, yes.
Okay, okay, let me go back over here then. I went to this microphone.
Ah.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay.
Loud and clear.
All right. Okay, so you 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3. Let's just go live now. Good metaphysical morning, Elijah.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you today, sir?
I am.
Is that lighting okay? Still, am I still?
Yeah,
Okay.
You're a little washed out, but you're no longer backwards, so I can see your existence.
Okay. Yeah, I'm very washed out here. I'm not sure what to do about it, but go ahead. All right. We'll figure it out while we're talking.
Yes. So great to meet you in person, or at least what passes for in person these days.
Right, exactly. How are you doing today?
Doing good, getting busy for my daughter's birthday. She turns 11.
Oh, nice.
Yes, and so we were running around picking up cupcakes and negotiating COVID protocols with all of her classmates, which is
okay.
an adventure.
So you're going to have a little something for her at the house?
Yeah, we're going to do an escape room this afternoon.
Okay. Oh, wow, that's so nice. That's nice. They should enjoy that.
Good. How are you doing? I'm
doing well. I'm doing very well. Just preparing for a few things myself. But outside of that, just I want to tell you before I forget, I enjoyed the conversation that you had with Janet and Kate. It was very interesting.
Oh, wow. The Zoasophy thing. Good. Yeah. So I just listened in to your conversation with our mutual friend, Claudia.
Okay.
So we got a little bit of an inside background on each other here.
Yeah, exactly.
I really liked her interview with you. I thought actually that you did a better job with her than I did.
Really?
Because I feel like I had what I considered softball questions, like how do you reconcile science and religion and what is the for civilization, which to me really are softball questions. Yeah. Well, she was asking you hard questions about like, how did you come out to your pastor and how do you answer someone who's facing suicide? It's like, okay, those are hard questions. Right, the philosophical stuff is the easy part to me.
Well, but it was probably also what people wanted to know. Also, it was probably also what she was asking you. It was you got a physicist right in front of you. I'm going to ask some of these questions.
Yeah, and that's fine. But so I hope it's helpful and people enjoyed it and it was entertaining and inspirational. But it's the. And one of the things that may come up is that I find the hard personal questions far more illuminating than the hard intellectual questions.
Okay.
So anyway, I thought to start with, I always ask 3 questions, some of which I know a little bit of from Claudia, but just so this is sort of self-contained. Sure. Where were you born?
Okay.
What did you study? Or I'm trying to think, like, what were you trained as? Because not everyone went to college, and trying to make that more general. And then the third is, why are you here? Like, what is the chain of events that you can kind of assign causation to that led to us having this conversation from your perspective?
Okay. I was born in Panorama City, California, and on June 20th, 1984, at around 3:00 in the afternoon. My mother said that, I don't know if the word precipitous would be correct, but I just came right out. There was no delay. She said that my dad, she and my dad couldn't get to she said they did make it to the hospital, and as soon as they got her in the delivery room, I came. So I guess I was eager to get here for some odd reason. I don't know. And then what I studied in secular school was history. But my passion is metaphysics. That I have always been a student of. As you heard me mention to Claudia, my mother my grandmother and my step-grandfather, my mother's stepfather, they were living in Los Angeles in the 1960s, around 66, 67. And their next door neighbors, Jim and Faye Allen, had started going to this strange school of metaphysics, and especially strange for people of color who when I say people of color, I mean Black African American or Black people of color, because we tend to be very devoted to Christianity, whether wrong or right, and some would believe that it is our ancient religion, even though it's not the religion of Native African people or our ancestors, but we tend to cling to it like it is. So when you have somebody, like Dr. Kinley, the founder of the school of the Institute of Divine Metaphysical Research, that's what the school's called. It was just truly astonishing that they even took the time to go down there and listen after their neighbors told them about this man and this experience that he called his vision of the Christ or the Elohim that he experienced in Springfield, Ohio on June 6, 1931. And so as a result of them growing up in the school, my grandmother had 7 kids, my four girls and 3 boys. My mom is the second oldest girl. So they got away from it for a little while when they moved down to Sylmar, San Fernando Valley. They left LA in the 80s and moved down to Sylmar. So my grandmother would go off and on, and they would kind of go off and on. But then in the early 1980s, maybe late 70s, early 1980s, they kind of got back into it very strong. And that was right around the time that I was born. By the time I was born, they were already well into it. And of course, so me and my cousins were raised in this odd school of metaphysics where we were taught that God is not in the sky, and that he dwells a lot closer than that, and that his name is, and that Lord is a title, and God is a title, and that there was no letter J in the Hebrew, Greek, or Latin language to this day, and it was the newest letter to the English alphabet. So we were calling, and as a kid, I was embarrassed, to say the name Yahshua, because not a lot of people knew, I was embarrassed about my embarrassment. I felt guilty about being, I felt very guilty about it. At that time, I hadn't started my own journey of ministering, but as a youngster, I didn't always like to share that with people because I thought they would think I was odd, or what are you talking about, Yahweh, or what is that? Of course, now today you say Yahweh, people be like, oh yeah, I know him. But back then for a kid, you just kind of wanted to blend in at school. People ask you about Christmas, because we didn't celebrate Christmas, but my parents, or my mom and my stepfather, always got us gifts and things like that. And we, birthdays and all of that, we weren't like Jehovah's Witnesses in that sense that you couldn't celebrate birthdays or anything like that. But it was just not a traditional Christian upbringing. So, but later on, when I began to kind of listen, and I would say the Holy Spirit had me listening, and I was no longer going just to get some candy from the store before we went into the building. I began to become quite zealous, in my desire to know the truth. Mm-hmm. And, that kind of took off from there.
Cool. So what's the narrative thread that goes from there to where how we met on the Wisdom app and ended up having this conversation?
How we met on the Wisdom app is that I as I was telling somebody the other day, Ernie, that sometimes I think the creator or divine intelligence really deals with you on an individual level. He's kind of, I don't know if that was you, maybe it was somebody else that said it, but no, I think it was you. We're talking about how that the gurus would go apart. Oh, we just lost our connection. Oh, okay, it's there. Mm-hmm. How the gurus would go apart. How it talks about how the Messiah would go apart from the crowd and just dwell in the serenity of nature alone and by himself. I don't know if that was you that was mentioning that or someone else, but I think that when you began to go on your spiritual journey, and to many people, what I went through would maybe be likened unto maybe the dark night of the soul, because I went through addiction. I had these pains and wasn't intending on becoming dependent on painkillers, but as most people don't. But I went through that, and I felt like a fraud for that, because I was still ministering. I was still going down there preaching and teaching and talking to people, but yet I knew I had this issue on the side. And so I guess you could say I went through that dark night of the soul. And even after that, I just kind of became very separated from my other constituents in the school. And we had a lot of young people, and I became kind of famous in the congregation because I could preach and teach in the same fashion as our dean could, the dean of the school, Dr. Harris. And some people even started calling me Little Dr. Harris, all over the organization. Have you heard this young man, they were calling me by my birth name, Brandon Ware, in the San Fernando chapter, who can teach and preach just like Dr. Harris. So people started, coming, and can you put Dr. Ware up tonight? Because we want to hear what he has to say. Everything okay?
Yeah, I'm just taking some notes so I don't
Okay.
Interrupt your thread, but I don't want to lose the ideas that are coming up.
Okay. Is there something you want to ask me at this point, or you rather me keep going?
No, keep going. I'll just take the
Okay.
notes, and then we'll keep
Okay.
going later.
And so, as that went on and on and on, I began to kind of question, am I just playing church? Am I just coming down here because it pays homage to tradition? I never questioned what Dr. Kinley brought. I never questioned the truth of what we were dealing with. That was never the question. I questioned me. I questioned me. I always believe that the creator is, and when I say real, I'm not talking about real as this computer in front of me. I believe that he was a living dynamic pulse, that animates us and works in our lives, and that he is our lives. I believe that. But because of my own conduct and my own behavior, not even so much with the sexuality thing, Ernie, but just because I felt like something is missing here. I'm not feeling this joy that everybody says I should be feeling. I'm not feeling this peace that everybody says I should be feeling. Yeah, I have happy days. Yeah, there are times when I enjoy certain ministers when they get up and minister before us. And I get something out of maybe some occult hidden thing that they brought out concerning Yahweh and metaphysics, and what this scripture really points to with the woman at the well, and how her five husbands really represent the five senses, and all of that. I mean, things like that. Like I was telling somebody, I mean, what Dr. Kinley brought and what Dr. Harris gave to us as his immediate predecessor, if you will, was awesome. It would knock your socks off. I mean, right up, I would say surpassing even Neville Goddard and Emmett Fox and Emmanuel Swedenborg. But because he was a Black man, he didn't get that same notoriety as a Neville Goddard. Neville barely got the notoriety.
Sorry, so just so I can say, which of those was a Black man?
Dr. Harris and Dr. Kinley were both Black men, although Dr. Kinley, his grandmother was a white Irish woman, and he had Native American in him.
Okay, because you mentioned that like it was kind of unusual for a Black family to move to sort of something outside kind of the culturally
no, it was a Black
normative Christian.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a Black organization. Okay, so you weren't
it
leaving
was
the Black community say, but you were leaving sort of the normative Christian
exactly
environment within that. Okay, good. That's good insight.
Yeah, that's what I meant. We had white people in the organization. The president of the school, Dr. Mathis, was a white man, and Dr. Kinley, the founder, felt that the original president of the school, Dr. Gross, was also a white man. And Dr. Kinley said, I'm putting you men here because I know if you're the president of the school, then you can be the face of the school to the world. And they might listen a little bit more if they see your face versus so he made these white men often the president of the school. As a matter of fact,
these were like the 1930s, right?
This was 1931 when he first had this experience, and the school went on from there through originally in Ohio, and then there was this mass exodus from Ohio out to Southern California. Yes.
Okay. All right. So we left you in your dark night of your soul where you didn't have significant peace and joy.
Yeah. And so I began to question that, I began to question myself more than anybody else. And it got to the point, Ernie, where I just got tired of what we call in the Black church, playing church. I got tired of playing church. I got tired of
Yeah.
going down there and putting on a happy face. And boy, wasn't that something? And did you hear what was said today? And doesn't that just make you want to just run? I say I can't do it anymore. I can't do it anymore. I'm over it. I'm not fit. I don't feel that. I'm not saying it's not real for you, but I can't attest to that. I'm over here feeling like I'm not suicidal, but I just don't want to be bothered. That's what I just don't want to do it. I'd rather, and the creator did that. He put me alone and by myself, and made me really look at myself and what it is that, I said I believed and I said I understood, because the question that I have to ask myself is, if you believe this truth, and this is what I often pose to my friends of color, and sometimes they get mad at me for saying this. I said, but black people are some of the most religious people in the world. I said, if we are some of the most religious people in the world, and I'm not one of these, I'm not a black conservative. I don't identify with the Democrats or I'm independent. I tend to vote more Democrat when I do vote, but I'm not a black conservative or anything like that. But I do ask the question, with all this religion we have, why are we in the state and condition that we're in as a people? If we're serving this omnipotent God, either something wrong on our end or something wrong on his end, So, it's we gotta ask these, and just looking at my own life, I'm not throwing off on the people in the hood. I was raised in a middle class family and all that, but still, I just looking at my own behavior and my own conduct, and what is going on. You believe in this omnipresent creator, and you can talk about what he did with the Israelites and what he did with Job and what he did with this one. If you say he's present and accounted for today, that ought to reflect, and it should reflect in us as a community and as a people, or we're just playing church, So I got alone and by myself, and eventually, as time went on, Dr. Harris transitioned, the dean of the school. Dr. Harris, my immediate mentor, who I admired so much. I wanted to be just like him. But he transitioned out of the flesh at the age of 98 on September 13th, 2018. And that really further caused me to begin to look at myself, because even though I wasn't down there anymore, and there is visible leadership still there, and it's quite adequate. I don't think you could ask for any better. The person that became dean, which is Dr. Harris' stepson, Aaron, wonderful minister, went and very transparent about the things that he's gone through in his own life. That's what I love about Dr. Bryant so much, is that, he does not put on airs. He doesn't fake the funk and try to be this holy roller. He is very straightforward. And listen, I am not your savior. I have been through it myself. I know where you are. So, let's just have the conversation type person. And so, but even though with that, when his father, Dr. Harris, stepfather, Dr. Harris, transitioned out of the flesh back in 2018, that again caused me to really look at myself, because there was nobody here anymore that I could look to, from a physical standpoint. Now I really have to go within and stand on my own 2 feet. And so, I kind of got this desire to start sharing metaphysics with people. And I would talk to friends and people at the gym, and they'd say, why don't you tell people about this? And even when I would talk to family members, they say, you still have so much to share with people. Why don't you, and I'm even like that. And I'll just share this with you, Ernie. I'm even unsure with the app, if that's the right thing for me, because I don't want to turn that into a work again, and as I was sharing with somebody, people like you, I love talking to, just because, you're always causing us to pause and think, and just, you're kind of very, I'm just saying type person. That you can do what you want to with it. I'm just saying, and I always appreciate that about you. Hey, I was thinking about this, this is where I'm at on it, and I'm just saying. And so there are people that I enjoy, but as I was telling somebody that, you know, I don't want that to become a work. And when people start to, you know, oh, hey, you know, you're so beautiful, and I see the light dwelling in you and all that, it brings back, you know, nightmares from, you know, when I was, you know, ushered up and, you know.
Performance PTSD.
Oh gosh, exactly. So that's how I got to where I am now sharing. I have Zephyr, which is a little easier, my podcast, because it's just me talking and it's just me sharing. I'm very much, as I was telling someone last night, I'm very much in the place where I of my own self can do nothing. And I'd rather look to the universal presence of the Almighty manifesting as me and not relying on Elijah, if you understand what I mean by that, to share and edify people and be what he thinks he's supposed to be, because that drove me to drugs the last time, you know. So I don't want to do that again.
Wow. Okay. So I think I missed a beat in the story somewhere.
Okay.
And but let me just kind of write that down, and I'll hold that intention. Dark Knight 2 podcast is the gap there. And let me share my story first, and then we can kind of pick up the threads as we go along. So I really appreciate your sharing. And I by the way, I love one of the punchlines of this is that when COVID hit and we started moving online, it occurred to me, what are the things that are easier now that were hard beforehand? Everyone else said it was obsessing over things that were easy beforehand that are hard now. But I was like, well, one thing that you can do is you can have conversations and record them. And that, because it's like one thing to like set up a camera and a mic in a room with a bunch of people, because that's really weird. But if you're already on Zoom, you push a button, your broadcast, it's not a big deal. And I love the idea of oral history and like live recording. And so that's why I love that I can find people who are willing to have these conversations in public, where other people, like, you know, I had this wonderful chat with Janet and Kate that you were able to eavesdrop in.
Yeah, I enjoyed that
it's recorded.
so much.
Like, you know, and like that's beautiful. Like, this is kind of my shtick now. Is like having these conversations online because I'm trying to build up this body of work and experiences and interactions. And so anyway, but going for it. So I was born in Chicago, October 8, 1967, 3 months after my parents arrived in the US. And so, you know, this is in Chicago in October, my parents just moving from a tropical country. So I have enormous respect for my parents and what they went through in raising me. And, but also because of that, I was born bicultural. I often lament the fact that my brother, who's a year and a half older, is both more Indian and more American than I am. So I've always felt because I was a nerd back before nerds were cool.
Right?
Now
you're very cool now.
Yeah, like Silicon here, nerds are normative, right? But back then it was very disorienting, and so the way I phrase it now is that I turned to the search for absolutes to try to ground myself in something, and so I studied physics and theology. Were kind of like the two things I sort of thought that, looking back, I think they're both driven. I'm trying to find something that, because anything I did was wrong by some cultural norm. Right. So Asian culture is very much around the community. You exist to serve the community. Western culture is very much about individuality, right? You know, the community exists to serve you, right? And like, so whatever I did was like wrong by somebody. So it's like, okay, not consciously, but it's like, can I just find some base of identity that is not, you know, contradictory like this? So I ended up studying physics sort of professionally, went through college and graduate school and all that. And then, but studied theology sort of as a passion project. So I did all sorts of Bible studies and courses and this and that. So the first inflection point was I was in graduate school. So I grew up in what I would consider a very, my parents were unusual in that personally they were very, I guess, what we would call fundamentalist. You know, like we were really big into the 7-day literal creation thing throughout my college, you know, when I was growing up and involved in sort of this activism and seminars and things like that. And I had my first inflection point. I met a guy named Hugh Ross, who was, I guess, what we would call a compatibilist, and that he said, I take the Bible literally, but I think you need to reinterpret it from this point of view. And so he pitched this idea of if you take creation as a story told from the viewpoint of the surface of the earth rather than from the cosmos, you can reconcile the Bible and science. And so, like, I'm not sure how much that I still agree with, but it was like a really useful scaffolding for me to sort of escape from the fundamentalist worldview. I say, okay, so you can be, because in the fundamentalism worldview, either you are serious about taking the Bible literally, or you don't care at all about God. Right? That was the dichotomy that they kind of defined themselves as in and out. And my parents were like theologically but personally they were very ecumenical. They went to all different kinds of churches and spoke at places about missions and stuff like that. So there was this sort of this dichotomy between sort of their ideology and their practice, if you will.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so the first beat on that was that transition from fundamental just sort of more broadly evangelical worldview, I guess is kind of the term of like, we take the Bible seriously, but we're not necessarily going to get beat up around very particular literal interpretations of things and trying to find more like the way that I would work it is that the evangelical perspective is more to the extent that it's distinct from fundamentalist, because there's a lot of overlap, is that it's pragmatic. The goal is like, we want to really focus on evangelizing, bringing people to know Jesus Christ. And so that pragmatic focus was different than the sort of dogmatic focus. So like, if you're willing to show up and do the work, evangelicals will accept you. The non-fundamentalist evangelicals will be fine with you, whereas the litmus tests for fundamentalism are a lot stricter. So that was one beat in that. The second beat that happened was in my 20s. I hit my dark night of the soul, sort of around issues of sexuality, perhaps different than yours, but and I ended up this place, I think very much like you, where it's like, I don't believe that God is real. I don't disbelieve that God is real, right? And I don't disbelieve even that God is good, but I lost faith that God's definition of good matched my definition of good. And so that was the place. And so I still went to church and participated in whatever, but there was that was when I started crawling down into the hole of addiction to try and cope with this pain that like my spirituality, and even though I did all the things that everyone expected of me, it's like, it's not really working the way they say it's supposed to. There's something wrong here. So the next inflection point for me was actually 9/11, which I'm glad you're at least old enough to remember, because some of these people I'm sorry I talked to.
I know, right? It's like, when do we get to this age when we're like, people that are so far behind us, and now it's like, I don't even know if you were on the earth, when that happened.
It's like, do you remember when people would have questions and could not just pull out a device and answer them immediately? Like my children have no concept of a world of where you just sit around pontificating for hours about things because no one knows. It's like, it's like okay, there's some, there's a fundamental inflection point there. But that, anyway, so 9/11, and what I noticed was that like nobody I knew sort of predicted 9/11. It was an anomaly. It was a interruption.
Yeah,
and
I was in 12th grade at that time.
Yeah, 12th grade. Yes, you were pretty self-aware at that point, right? Yeah. And so they, what I noticed, I tried to make sense of it to myself. I tried running a bunch of stuff to just say like, because like there's two things were in tension, because there were two kind of dominant narratives. One is that they hate us because we're good, which is sort of the conservative viewpoint. Because we stand for all these wonderful positive virtues. And then there's a liberal viewpoint, is they hate us because we're evil, because we're imperialist and capitalist. It's like,
true.
And what was funny was I noticed all the voices I could hear were saying the same things they said before the attack, only louder. And it's like, that doesn't feel like a good use of information. Like if something really dramatic and transformational happens that you did not predict, then, like you should revise your theory to accompany this. It's like if there's an eclipse of the sun that your astronomy didn't predict, like there's something wrong with your astronomy. I'm sorry. And it's like, so this led to this intellectual quest, which culminated in something that I ended up calling, and then discovering that there was already a thing called radical centrism, which if you've never heard of, you might find interesting. So basically, it was a movement in the early 2000s that there was a bunch of people, and there's a think tank called the New America Foundation, which is still around, that was associated with this. It was kind of
the way it was described is that, so you've got your kind of traditional conservatives and Republicans, and one way of slicing it up is conservatives are sort of socially conservative and fiscally conservative, and your liberals are socially liberal and fiscally liberal. But there's another pole, which is the libertarians, who are fiscally conservative but socially liberal.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
And so radical centrists were kind of the opposite pole, in that they tended to be sort of socially conservative but fiscally liberal.
Okay.
So the idea of communitarian is that we believe in community and not just in the individual. But we believe that the government has a right to invest in helping create healthy communities.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And so and that honoring the individual, that helping individuals flourish within the community, as opposed to sort of the classical or a sort of traditional sort of New Deal progressive viewpoint of leveling, whatever that means. Okay. So that was where radical centrism. So it was a wonderful community. But what was interesting is that at the same point, I was kind of developing all these theories and interacting with different thinkers in this space in some of the very early internet, or kind of around the phase transition to Web 2.0.
Right.
I was going through I got married in the meantime, and then my addiction issues blew up. And my wife said, "You got to do something about this." And so I started a counseling process with my pastor for my church in San Jose, who was originally trained as a counselor. And he suggested, I don't know what the right technical term for it is, but a sort of dialogue therapy where you write a letter to your younger self. And his framing was that, well, you're very intellectually mature and spiritually mature, but you're very emotionally immature. So figure out how to take that present you and use that to minister to that younger you and come
wow,
in.
I probably would have been diagnosed the same way. That's interesting. Well,
yeah. So the modern version of that is probably what they call internal family systems. A guy named Dick Schwartz has the idea that you've got kind of your inner child, your outer adult, and your angry teenager.
Wow.
And there's these different dynamics you have, just like you have in a family. So this led to an extraordinary series of dialogues and journaling, and a lot of internal reconciliation within myself. But then there was still a sense of like, okay, I understand where my anger is coming from. But like, there's still this question, and the way I would frame it, and so the mystical encounter I went through that kind of resolved it for me was I was reading through John chapter 11. I was actually browsing it again a couple days ago, and it's the story of Lazarus.
Right.
And what's interesting to me is that I know one of the big tenets, it sounds like, of divine metaphysics is they read the scripture purely symbolic. And like, I don't have a problem with that. I said, but it's interesting is that what I have not yet heard or understood about divine metaphysics is the concept of narrative. Like I listened to the videos you sent me about like, this is how we interpret the crucifixion, this is how we interpret Christmas. It's like, okay, I can see how that makes sense, but it's not yet clear to me how that fits together into a narrative thread. Because like in the the literal reading of the Gospels, you've got Christmas and the Annunciation and the Last Supper and the crucifixion and the resurrection and the ascension, right? There's this really interesting plot narrative there. And to me, the most interesting thing about scripture is these narratives of these sequence of events and how they fit together. And whether you take it literally or symbolically,
well, there is, but we'll get into that later.
Okay, yeah, cool, yeah, right. So that's I'll just stick a pin in that as a thing. But so the narrative here was fascinating to me is that what I was reading in the mindset I was in at the time is like Jesus comes across as incredibly, or I was experiencing Jesus as really cold and calculating. It's like, wow, my best friend Lazarus is sick. I'm going to go away for 3 days and let him die. It's like, what? Right? And then he comes back and makes all these like obscure pronouncements to Mary and Martha who are dealing with the enormous grief. They come to them with their genuine pain, genuine hope. And it just feels like, and I said, this is exactly how I feel. I saw myself in that story. Is like, is that like, okay, yeah, I believe that God is real and he's going to also like, I am hurting, I am dying. And I like getting these cliches.
That's right.
And it's like, what is it? And then we get to Jesus wept. And like, boom, it hit me like, oh my God, like it felt the way there was a flip in that it felt to me beforehand that the caring was a facade and the reality was these hard, cold hoops you have to just keep jumping through, you know, to make this distant God feel happy with you, which is all sorts of cultural and psychological baggage you can interpret from that. And then my head was like, no, it's the other way around. There's this deep, visceral experience where God knows what I'm feeling. And these formal hoops are actually the facade.
Okay.
And I think that's not unlike kind of your perspective, the way I've understood you talk about metaphysics, is that the reality is that we have this deep existential connection to the divine. And this world that we're in is in some sense kind of a facade that is set up to help us experience and understand that in different ways. So anyway, so that was kind of the big inflection flip for me that kind of launched me. And that led to my blog, which I call Radically Happy. Because the idea was, okay, because like I was trying to seek happiness, but I was expecting a superficial happiness, and God doesn't care that much about my superficial happiness, but he does care about this deep happiness, what you were calling the inner man, right?
Can I tell you real quick? Can I tell you
Yeah.
real quick what C.S. Lewis said about that? And I always think about this quote and I share it with people often. C.S. Lewis has this quote out of his book. I'm not sure if it's The Problem of Pain or Mere Christianity, but he says that it's not that God is unwilling to give you happiness apart from him. It's just that he knows that there is no happiness apart from him. And
yeah.
I always think about that, but I didn't mean to cut you off, but finish.
No, but yeah, I very much I think about the his book. Have you read Till We Have Faces?
I haven't finished Till We Have Faces. I need to finish
right.
Till We Have Faces.
But yeah, to me, that's always been the thing is that like, you know, God cannot speak to us face to face until we have a face to speak to.
Right.
There's an internal process we need to go through to be able to see God and for God to be able to, for us to be able to understand. So anyway, so that was the next beat was that. And then that led to, you know, a lot of very generative and redemptive narratives. But one of the things that led to was out of this was that like, okay, there's something here that I grasped onto that even though I'd gone through all the standard evangelical training and everything they did, like I can see how it helped some people get to this place, but it really obscured it for me. And so I had to like I honor and value and I still coexist within that space. But I don't have as much faith in it as most of them do. And that created a bunch of tensions, which had some, I often say my biography is going to be the, a funny thing happened on the way to the accelerator, you know, a life of going from a physicist into the space. But it was the title is All the Right Mistakes, the hilarious failures and improbable success of a physicist in Silicon Valley. So I've got the hilarious failures part nailed. I'm still working on the improbable success part, but the
I know that's right.
but what happened was, so then COVID hit, and so I had all these theories, and ever since, you know, the radical centrism thing, every 6 months I'm trying to save the world. Like I've been iterating on like, well, let me try this project, and let me try this pitch and this movie and this document, and you know. It has been an extraordinary learning experience. And along the way, I've built some really powerful relationships. Right. And some of them, you know, continue. Some of them blew up over some of these issues. And so it's been this journey.
Oh, trust me, I understand.
So the last narrative arc was when COVID hit, I started talking with a bunch of my friends about another one of these reform efforts. And I talked to a friend of mine and said, you know, I don't know what to do. Like, do I write a manifesto? Do I start a podcast? You know, and he says, well, why don't you do all those things? And so we started a Zoom group where we would meet every week to talk about these issues. We called it the Great Reset. And extraordinarily along the way, we had about a dozen people show up at various points and be part of it. And what was fascinating, hold on, my dog is desperate to be let into.
Okay, no problem. No problem. Take your time. Yeah, no problem. Take a little time yourself.
Bad idea. All right. You want a Zoom bomb? Yes, my dog likes Zoom bomb.
Cute. Is he the one in the picture?
Yeah, here's the one in the picture.
Cocker Spaniel.
Yeah, English Cocker Spaniel.
Yeah, my cousins had one of those.
Oh, yeah.
His name was Sinbad. He died many years ago, but very cute dog. Yeah.
Very cute dog. So anyway, so we had some of the most, this is all mostly people from Silicon Valley or from that, kind of background, although we had two friends from Caltech, one in Oregon, one in Thailand, who ended up joining us. So, but like incredibly well educated, all really passionate, devout believers, incredibly knowledgeable of scripture.
Wow, I would have loved to have heard that conversation.
So that's all online. The Great
Reset.
Okay.
Oh, that's on your YouTube page.
It's on a different YouTube page.
Okay.
This is kind of, and I'll explain some of the transition there. It's called Discipling by Jesus, is what the name of the channel is. Okay. And the way we got there is that, so these are amazing people, right? And like so passionate, so mature, so open to new ideas. And you forgive the stereotype, we squabbled like a bunch of junior high girls. We would have periodic blowouts where like people would refuse to talk to each other. It's like, what is happening? And I finally decided the way I explain this is, okay, it's not that we are necessarily more immature than your average church, but we actually trust each other enough to get into deep enough issues that all these things bubble into the surface. And we had a number of extraordinary blowouts, some of which people asked to be pulled down off of the web because they were kind of embarrassing for the people involved.
Wow. You're over here preaching to the choir, but go ahead. I'm with you.
But then we also had a couple of redemptive encounters where those relationships got restored.
Okay.
And that led to,
can I ask you this? Because did it make you feel like I shouldn't have even created this? I should have just left this alone when those periods would happen, whether you individually were at variance with someone or it was just other two people in the group of the 12. Did you ever feel like, you know what, I was more at peace, when I was just, kind of confiding within myself, and not,
So this is the thing that the beat that I missed, which will explain the answer to you, is in 2011, funny note, a friend of mine once called me a Renaissance manager. And I said, I don't think I qualify as a Renaissance man, but I think but I feel like I could qualify if I would run a half marathon and create a daily webcomic. Because the physical and the artistic are the two things I think
you are too much.
And I just sort of said that, 25 years ago, or whatever. And then in 2011, I felt like God told me to go run a half marathon. Because it turns out there's a half marathon right outside my house, like a few blocks away, the San Jose Rock and Roll Half Marathon. And I would drive to church, and like once a year, I would have to take a different route because we were blocked by this half marathon. And I think it was 44 at the time. And I said, okay, I think it's time for me to run my half marathon. And I sort of argued with God as I normally do. And fortunately, I lost as I normally do. And so
don't we all?
Well, no, a lot of people fight God and win. That's the tragedy.
Really? Well, yes. That's a very beautiful. That is the tragedy. Yeah.
And so, or some people refuse to fight.
Also, that's true.
And there's an interesting narrative arc there. So, but the thing was, so I hired a personal trainer, lost 20 pounds, trained for it, ran the half marathon. And in that same period of time, we basically did a major church reorganization. And I call that sort of peak Ernie was 2012, when I was professionally and spiritually and physically kind of in my top form. And then we had kind of like a year or two, a year or so of the honeymoon. And then everything started collapsing in a lot of ways, some ways more redemptive than others. But the thing I learned during that year of training was that, I could sprint or I could run or I could walk. And the question is, how much do I want to suffer in order for what I want to achieve? And the biggest lesson I learned was the difference between good pain and bad pain. And one of the secrets of life is that our natural state is that we will tend to tolerate bad pain and avoid good pain. And so the secret of growth is learning to embrace good pain and shun bad pain. So that was like the deep, like everything that's happened in my life since then kind of grew out of that decision to actually run the half marathon, because it fundamentally changed my understanding. There's a wonderful Imagine Dragons song called Pain.
I love Imagine Dragons.
And I once posted.
I love Radioactive.
Oh yeah. Have you seen the music video?
For Radioactive?
Yeah.
I don't remember it.
Well, you would remember it if you had. It's got like stuffed animals with lasers out of their eyes.
Oh, okay.
You're gonna see it. It's beautiful. It's a wonderful picture of redemption. We should just do a study on that.
Oh, okay.
We could do a whole series on Imagine Dragon. But I posted that like it talks about, pain. I said, this is a better creed than I find in most churches. And like, all my friends got deeply offended by this, but that's another story. So anyway, right, because like it's the pain that is how we grow. And like, if the Passion of the Christ means anything, is that pain is a central facet of Christianity.
Right.
And yet we don't, yet we tend to have a bloodless Christianity in a lot of places, which is, anyway, so the
right.
And
it's like, disguised that they call it spirituality now.
Whatever. I mean, the terminology is less interesting to me than the practice. And so anyway, so when I started this group, it's like, okay, what I realized early on was like, it's not like I have an answer, but I have a question. And what I also realized fairly soon on, I figured what happened was I would have like I have this big idea I want to pitch, and I would pitch the idea, and I would realize it doesn't actually solve the problem. And sometimes even my pitching was making the problem worse.
Oh, wow.
And I got to and like, there was a really powerful episode. We were studying the line where Paul says, I did not come to you with persuasive words, but with power.
Excellency of speech, yeah.
The translation is persuasive words. I said, oh my God, for my entire life, I thought being a good Christian was learning how to come with persuasive words.
Wow.
Crap. And I wanted to explain this to people. And I said, wait a second though, but if I sit here and make people listen to me that I'm trying to use my persuasive words to complain them of this, it's like I have trapped myself in my own knowledge. And the only way out is to say, okay, the whole point of this then is to create a context where I can wrestle with and learn how to live out this truth. And if I'm lucky, find ways to help explain it to people so they can do the same.
Okay.
And so so when these things would blow up, I say, okay, this pain is precisely the thing I need so I can learn to demonstrate truth.
Okay.
And so that was the thing and so the fact that people stuck around for this was constantly amazing to me, because people would get to it and complain. Like the only thing people had in common is they would show up and complain about how this group wasn't working. But they kept doing it. And I kept saying, okay, you try and do it. And we tried that. And then something would happen. And so we had all this. So eventually we had these two redemptive encounters, which led to something that I said, okay, let me start over again with this thing, building around like everything I've learned over these 6-week seasons. We did six-week seasons, 42 weeks, like every week since COVID hit, starting in April.
Okay.
And at the end of it, I said, okay, we had this big sort of ending thing where we did communion together, and some of the people kept meeting in another context. But I started this other group called Discipling by Jesus, which is its own YouTube channel, and it links to all the great reset
That's where
videos.
those conversations are?
Yeah, that's where all those conversations are. I'll send you a link afterwards.
Okay. Yeah.
There's a lot, but
I'll just listen to a couple of them just to see.
Yeah. The one on education, I think, was one of my favorites, and maybe the ending at the end. Even though the ending at the end was like everything else, like, okay, this is what I want to say, and people say, no, I don't want it to end. I don't disagree with you. I don't agree with your premise. It's like it was totally appropriately dysfunctional in exactly the right ways. It was beautiful in a horrible sort of way, or vice versa. I'm not sure which. Anyway, I started this other thing called Discipling by Jesus, kind of a reboot of all of that, and that one actually worked, in the sense that we went through this process, and a friend of mine took the process and used it on Fridays. I would do it on Thursdays. And we went through this really extraordinary series of encounters. And then we kind of stopped, because it's like, we both felt like the Spirit wasn't giving us permission to proceed, and no one else was willing to take up the mantle. And so we spent the summer doing a bunch of sort of one-off, sort of these little study discussion things, these encounter groups. And then the thing that brought me to wisdom, again, maybe we'll just end after this because it's running late and we can pick this up in a future call, is that I heard a talk by a group called the Minerva Project, which was, and this is actually interesting in the context of, I think, Divine Metaphysics. And they say his critique of higher education, something I've also ranted about and has been a source of many crises in my life when I've ranted inappropriately in the wrong place to the wrong person, like family members. But was that the challenge is that everything in higher ed is taught contextually. Like this is how you learn physics, this is how you learn English, by someone who's embedded in that context. And it is your job to figure out how to translate that to a different context. And it's like, so what if we just flip that and said, hey, the important thing are these transferable skills. And we start with that. And it's like, oh, by the way, you'll learn it first here. But then the whole purpose of the rest of your education is for you to practice learning this concept, applying it in other contexts. And so these little hashtags they create, like audience. And you think about audience when you're reading literature and looking, and you practice it by like imagining book covers. But you can think about that in terms of, you can apply that to communication. You can apply that to writing a scientific paper. You can apply that to writing a Gantt proposal, right? So you learn this concept once in one context, and then you spend the next 3 years practicing in a different context and getting graded and evaluated about how good you are applying concepts, I should say, outside of their context. When I heard this, like, oh my God, this is exactly what drives me bonkers about Sunday morning sermons. Is they give you an answer in a context and you're left totally on your own to apply it in other contexts. And the further your context is from the source context, the harder it is. And then it's kind of your fault that you don't know how to do it. And it's like, okay, so like, what if we could, so what would it take to do that to spirituality? And I said, okay, my premise is being spiritual, reaching this sort of thing. I've given up on the belief that this is something that you can teach people to be spiritual, to be mature. But I think you can believe, but I do believe you can teach them what that means to give them a useful set of concepts for evaluating spiritual experiences and spiritual traditions. And so that was this idea, the conceit, if you will, that led to Zoasophy, this thing that I was talking about, was this idea. And there was a specific model that I came up with as part of this down, which has 3 components that, the experience of being human, and the purpose of spiritual. So one is like, some ways you don't, like, we need to start with a question before you find the answer, but some ways, until you find the answer, you don't know if you have the right question. So the answer I have is to the question of, what does it mean to be human? And so in this worldview,
I heard you talking about that.
Spirituality is, the point of spirituality is to learn to be fully human. And that there are 3 components to being human. One is connecting. The second is individuating. And the third, I'm not entirely happy what the word I'm using is yet. It's something like transcending or Christing, but the one I use most is christening.
You're talking about awakening or something like that.
So that's one of the questions that I wanted to discuss, but I think we would have this as the level setting, is whether what I mean by Christing or christening, is that the same as what you mean by awakening? Because I think they're analogous, but a lot and I think there's elements of it there. And my belief is that we're probably trying to describe the same thing. But you have a certain perspective on it from your tradition, and I have a certain perspective on it, both from my sort of evangelical tradition, which I still hold even if it's at arm's length, and this new Zoasophic perspective.
It's your word, Ernie.
I don't know, but I don't know how to pronounce it. So it's helping me, because the whole point is like, unless something is part of a community of practice, it doesn't really exist. Right, and it doesn't fully exist until it scales, and there's a level between.
Well, if I start using it and I convince my family to start using it and they convince their friends to start using it, it will find its way into the lexicon eventually.
Well, that's potentially right. Yeah, the question is, and I have a whole other podcast where we've been arguing about lexicons. We won't go into that.
Okay.
But what happened was I was having these ideas, and then the wisdom app showed up, and I said, well, there's lots of different postures I could take on this. But like, what is burning with me is like, I want to figure out this Zoasophic thing, and I've been doing these calls with my friends Kate and Janet and other people. But I had a tragedy where like I answered Kate's question and she was like, oh, okay, I'm good now. Because like for 4 episodes, she was upset with me, or there was a tension where she didn't agree with me or didn't understand me. And it's like, okay, this is energy. And it's like, okay, I'm just going to nail it down here. And I give her.
And you know what? It's funny. Let me just say this, because I like that question that you asked her about the boss role. When you asked her, what is the difference then? And you didn't use this term, but I'm using it, with my righteous indignation when I'm trying to get my kids out the door to go to school in the morning, and the surgeon who's kind to get his team together so that they can save this individual's life. I don't know if I really understood or agreed with her rebuttal to you. I think that was Janet.
Yeah, so we answered that in the next episode.
Okay.
What is it? I came up with a formal, technical, computational model of what I meant by a boss and de-individuation.
Okay.
And why it's mathematically necessary. And she goes, oh, that's what you mean. Okay, I agree. And it's like, well, yay, but now like, what do we do next? And so I've been kind of stuck. So this is in some ways the sequel to that, is this conversation I'm having with you. It's like, without it, like I sometimes feel like I have all the answers, but I've forgotten all but I don't have any questions. And I need a question for me to prompt what this is. And so this perspective of, and this is actually and so anyway, that's how I ended up on wisdom. And then I heard you speak and friended you, and then you heard me speak, and then we've been having this chat. And so I think we'll just tee that up as the question, is that what is the relationship between what I mean when I use the word Christing and when you use the word awakening? And can we come up with some sort of common language or shared experiences to understand?
I really don't use the word awakening personally. I use the word birth. That's what I was taught.
Okay, interesting. So, because the video you sent me used the word awakening.
That was Neville's term, but I was taught birth. New birth.
And that's interesting. So like, and even like there's the label, and then there's the concept, and then there's the problem that this is the answer for. And I think there's an interesting, like one possible framework that I've used usefully in the past is the sort of medical framework. This is the symptom, this is the diagnosis, this is the prescription, and this is the cure. Like the Standard Evangelical one, well, the problem is, you know, we are not happy. And the diagnosis is sin. And then the prescription is to accept Jesus into your heart. And the prognosis is then you will live a joyous life.
Well, can I ask you a question before we go? Because do you know anybody? I know you're not Hindu, but do you know anybody that's Hindu or practice Buddhism? Because my question with that kind of philosophy or religion is, does it tell the whole story of salvation, or does it just pick it up with the going up but not the coming down? Does it pick up the
does what? Sorry, does which? Like that evangelical narrative, or
the narrative of Hinduism or Buddhism? Does it pick up? I see where it's the awakening part. I hear a lot of people who practice Buddhism talk about the reawakening part or the awakening part. I don't know if it's reawakening for them, but the question that I don't know if they ask is how did we get in a state of sleep in order to need to be reawakened or awakened at all? That's
right.
My
I mean,
question.
the closest, I had a friend who was Buddhist I had some conversations with, you know, prior to Zoom, so they're not online, who I guess identifies or is influenced by Buddhism, and he or she, the pronoun is a bit ambiguous. Christy would talk about, well, I mean, and what I've read about Buddhism talks about how life is illusion. And so they don't talk about the process of so much wire illusion, but they sort of start from the place where we are in this world of illusion, Maya, the veil, and then how to get out of it. So, you know, so I don't know. I think the interesting thing that, like, because you are clearly, this is actually fascinating, because, you know, the divine metaphysic is, I would say, like, it's it inhabits a very similar space to Christianity. Right? Absolutely. You read the same books, you like the same authors, but I think it has, interestingly, we have very similar syntax, but also I think very different semantics. Like you mentioned how, like, for you, and so like that's a fascinating place. So I think that what, like, the project, such as it is for us to say, okay, let's, you and I, which have, different perspectives we're coming from, can we find a way to understand each other, that we can come up with a common language for discussing this, and both, so we understand each other.
Right.
Two, so we can say, can we come up with a generalized metaphysic that allows us to say, oh yeah, we have all these same concepts. This is perhaps underdeveloped or under vocalized in my metaphysic, but at least it's there. So there's a point of connection.
Right.
And then there's also the point of, I realize there's the experience, there's the concepts, there's the labels, there's the communication, and then there's the application, right? And there's this sort of arc we're going through. And I'm thinking that, like, I would love to, like, if we can do this, because we have a lot of shared territory, then it's like, okay, now with this, now we can say, okay, now let's find a Buddhist or a Hindu or somebody and say, hey, could you come along and let's have, either one-on-one or two-on-one or whatever, and see if we can interview people and say, help us see if we can understand your metaphysic in this terms, and what maps and what doesn't. And this is how you build this framework. Was like, this is like the, if you will, the holy grail of what a lot of these ecumenical efforts was trying to figure, like, can we find some common language to speak so we can have differences without divisions.
That is so hard. that is so hard for people. But you and Kate and Janet, I love the, I don't know how it normally is for you guys, but in that particular episode, it seemed to be very amicable disagreement. There was no all-out war like it tends to be, where I didn't sense that you were trying to maintain your righteousness, and neither did I sense that. I mean, just from an outsider looking in.
Well, and that was like, there's two things that went on to that. One is that Janet and I have some issues which are still off to the side that we haven't resolved yet, but that's fine. We've talked about it, and she says, I have some issues. These are the salient ones, and we work through them, and the rest we'll just deal with later. So she has grace for me with stuff that I haven't addressed. It's also, and we have a history where we've worked through things. But also it's very a painful iterative design, both in terms of the external context of how we structure our conversations. Like, this is the focus. Like, I'm not here to try to teach, which puts me in this really power status position where if you question me, you're invalidating my role as teacher. It's like, I am a seeker who is curious about a question, and I'm pitching it to you like an investor, or like the model we used actually is like a entrepreneur pitching to investors. Is that your job is not
but what happens, judge, Ernie? What happens, and just to go back to what we were talking about before, and I find myself, what happens when there are questions that you have answered and you're unwavering on that? You're not going to negotiate about that.
Right, so that's the second half of it. So the first half is the context design. And the second half of the question, which is a big one, and we'll leave this as the teaser for the next one, which gets precisely to my issue of Christing, is how do I define my identity? And to me, this is actually the hard question, is how do we define our identity? What do we identify in there? I'll send you a link to something called the Keegan Maturity Model, which is an interesting framework for thinking about whether we define ourselves in terms of our perceptions, in terms of our desires, in terms of our values, in terms of our purpose. And just seeing that there's different ways to define this identity is quite interesting. And then another way of framing the big question of what does it mean to be human is, what does it mean to be? How do I define my existence? How do I define my identity? And those are precisely, I think, the hard questions that need to be answered. And if we can move this from the realm of my father-in-law's pastor, who's also an executive coach, calls it the amygdala hijack or the brain freeze. He says that if something happens, if we have an experience that either threatens one of the pillars of our identity or reminds us of past trauma, we will experience this amygdala hijack brain freeze. And then we must react because we're in fight, flight, or freeze rather than respond.
Okay.
And so a lot of what we're doing here is trying to create a context where these questions of identity can get surfaced in a way that they are things that we have and hold, rather than things that we are. And I'm still working out kind of what does that mean, but it's what I've been practicing, sort of semi-consciously for the last year and a half, is how to create a context where the things that matter most, and then there's a tension here, because if it's purely intellectual, then there's no real energy, there's no skin in the game, there's no semantics. It's just playing with words for fun, and I've done enough of that in my life. I don't want to do any more if I don't have to. But if it's too visceral and too personal, then you're in reaction mode, right? You don't want to either pontificate or react. You want to respond. And I think this question that you brought is a great way to frame it as a real thing, because I think this is a significant issue for you in both your philosophy and your personal life, is what do you do when you are someone else? Like the thing that you need to work through is the thing that is precisely the thing that is so deep to your identity that you can't talk about it in a detached intellectual way.
Right.
And that's really hard. And to me, this is a hard problem. And that to me is precisely the question that I want to answer in our next episode.
Okay.
In this context of these labels and of Christing and awakening or birth, and what else fits into there. And so,
well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. As always, I always enjoy talking.
I need to end with let's take at least 3 minutes for.
Sure, take whatever you need.
Right. So I gotta go take my kids' lunch. So I don't want to go into that. But let's go let you. How about you? This is the thing we do at the end of our DBJ. It was a framework of what did you like, and what did you so just to reflect back on this session, what did you like, and what did you wonder about? It's I really like this, and I wonder about this. This is a good thing that that caused me some tension, or that I'm really excited to explore next time. So your likes and wonders, just reflecting on our time together.
Okay.
We'll use that as our kind of closing statements.
Okay. I just enjoyed talking to an open-minded person that always, you never make statements, but always ask questions to me. That's the theme. Of course, you make statements, but the theme I get from you, just like I said at the beginning, is that, it is what it is for you, and you put it out there for others to question it themselves. But never, what I enjoy is that you have the confidence to ask the question, but you are in a place where you know what is right for you. You know where you have come from, and what is what for you with your creator and your redeemer. And I enjoyed that. I enjoy that every time I listen to you, that, hey, I was just thinking about this, and what is it that you have to, you're not afraid to ask. You asking that question, this is what I want to say. I don't get the appearance that you're afraid to ask that question because what if the answer doesn't line up with what you've been taught or what you know? You're confident enough that it's okay if it doesn't line up with what I've been taught or what I know, because I'm not really standing on knowledge. I'm standing on something deeper than that. That's what I get from you. So I'm not afraid. Whereas many times I think those of us that call ourselves teachers and preachers in the traditional sense, we don't ask people questions. We give them statements. We tell them this is the way it is. And this is this is why it is the way it is. I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. And so that is something that, I have to check myself with a lot of times, because if people question that, then what are you saying, that Dr. Harris didn't teach me correctly, you see, or whatever. And so that's what I check Elijah about a lot of times, whether I'm on the Wisdom app or not. I can't think of anything I didn't like. What I didn't
Dislikes,
like is
but like, well, yeah, but it's important actually. The way I framed the question is not likes and dislikes, and the word was very carefully chosen. We took us like a whole season to come up with this word wonder. It's like, what makes you wonder? Were there things that like, you know, he mentioned this. I'm curious about that because I'm not sure if it's, or you felt it could be curiosity, it could be excitement. They're all in the space of wonder. It could be things that it could be
what
discomfort.
is it?
It doesn't
You know,
have
it's
to be.
fun. Yeah. What, I mean, there was, you know, there were some things when you were talking, but I think they left my mind right now. But there were some things when you were talking about your individual experience, you know, that I was thinking, okay, what does he mean? Or, you know, when we were talking about, I don't know if you said it like this directly. I was wondering if your same definition of ego is my same definition of ego. And I don't know what you said to make me wonder that. But you said something in the conversation while we were talking. It wasn't directly the word ego. It didn't even have, but it was just talking about, you know what, sin, really, what you call sin and what I call sin. I wonder if we have that same understanding of what it means to sin and redemption and all that when you were talking about that, your traditional sense of Christianity and all of that. I began to wonder, okay, well, what does he look at as salvation versus damnation? Does he have a moral code that he lives by? I did wonder that about you initially. Are you very much, because I remember you corrected me on the app. You said, no, I did grow up in a traditional Christian background. And so talking to you, you seem very accepting and open. But I'm wondering, do you have that, you know, kind of, well, Christianity tells me this, so thereby I live by that, you know, as far as morals and all of that. You know, so that was one of the things that
those
I
good
wondered.
wonders.
Do you live by a Christian moral code? I mean, not even just about, you know, obviously, you know, my sexuality. So it wasn't like, oh no, we got to cancel the interview. I don't know what's going on with you. You know, I just might, you know, but I'm just saying this with anything, you know, oh, I don't drink, you know, I don't believe that people, you know, I just kind of wondered that when we were talking, you know, do you have this Christian moral code that you live by when it comes to certain things?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And there is a short answer, which is not a simple answer. And so I will save that for next week, because I think that gets into very much this question of identity. I mean, the short answer I'll give you is that I live within a Christian moral code, but not by a Christian moral code.
Oh, okay.
Right. So I have my own moral code, which is rooted in Jesus.
Okay.
And that, but culturally, I live within a Christian community. And so I try to honor and respect that Christian community with its mores and norms and values, and try to not give offense to those I'm living with. But my own personal moral code is different than the normative social Christianity I happen to be instantiated in at this point in time.
Okay. Great.
You know, and so that there's a which is an interesting tension at times, but
yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, but okay, so great, thank you. Anything else? Any other likes or wonders?
No, that was it. That was all I can think of right now. I have to start writing them down as I'm thinking about it, because I didn't want to stop you with something, but I did have some questions for you.
So that's one of the practice. So that's another practice, is use the Zoom chat. Just write down notes and questions so that you can kind of keep track of that. So that's a little thing we can try. So that's something I wonder if I should invite you to do next time, right? This is the wonders are not just the content, but the format.
Yeah, because that would have been a good idea for me. Yeah.
Yeah, and so like, you know, this is iterating on, you know, we have a question, we have a topic, we have a challenge. So I like that you're willing to show up and have this recorded conversation. That you, like me, are doing our spiritual processing in public. And I know even though in the divine metaphysic, there's sort of a axiom that you don't want to take the Bible literally, I certainly take it narratively. I feel like there's people who went through experiences and wrote them down, and whether they were literal or metaphorical, experiences, they wrote down that narrative, and that the fact that they did that is so powerful. Hearing the stories of what people went through, these narratives, and like, for me, this is living scripture. We are doing what the people in scripture did, and this is very literal. Like, we're getting recorded audio mechanically. So I'm sure somebody at some point will say, "Oh, this is a deep fake. They just made this up to prove their point." But until then, we can live with this fact as a literal record. And so I just love that you're willing to do that. I love that God brought us together
That's right.
That like, because there's a lot of parallels. I can see myself in your story, in
Okay.
different things you went through with addiction and sexuality.
Okay.
And I get my first sermon when I was 13. If I didn't get as
Mm.
serious about it. So like, there's a lot of things I can see there.
Mhm.
And I like your vulnerability that you
Mhm.
shared some of these pain points and frustrations. You shared like on the one hand, you love to be up there presenting and sharing these truths with people. On the other hand, you have these doubts and struggles with the fact that like, is this putting me in this place where I'm getting into your performance PTSD? That was the
Mhm.
phrase we came up with. Like,
Right. That. Yeah. I got to write that down real quick.
it's in the notes. I wrote that one down. I'll send that to you.
Performance. Yeah, I love that when you describe that. Performance PTSD. Yes.
I'm gonna use that as the
you.
title of the episode. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, I love that phrase that you came up with for me, because that's definitely something that I battle with.
Yeah,
Definitely.
interesting. Let me. They just changed the whole UI and how they do Zoom. Well, Zoom doesn't let me save things easily. That's bizarre. Okay, figure it out later. That's why it's recorded, so I have it. I really liked this idea of identity and ego as a framing device, and I think that is something that, one, it's good to have an intellectual discussion of, and two, we will probably demonstrate in the process of having this discussion how this interacts with what we're feeling in our identity.
Right.
And I wonder, that's a wonder. I wonder
Right.
how skillfully we will navigate that.
Yeah.
And I also wonder whether it's actually the places we least skillfully navigate it that will actually be the best learning.
Right. Okay.
So I wonder about
Okay.
that. I do wonder about, like, one of the wonders, and I'll just throw this out as a wonder, is that I wonder if this, the zoosophic framework, actually, one thing I wonder about is, what is the core narrative of divine metaphysic? And I wonder if that is a different slice on what I'm talking about in my Zoasophy, if it's a subset of some of the things, and that like there's things that are complementary, or if well, actually, I guess where's the Venn diagram? I think there's things where we overlap, where we talk about the same things with different labels. There's things which are like explicit in my metaphysic, which are implicit or in yours, I suspect. And there may be things that are insights in your metaphysic. I'm sure there are insights in your metaphysic that are under-articulated in mine.
Okay.
And so I wonder what those buckets are, and what I'm going to learn. So I guess the less technical way to say that, I wonder what I'm going to learn from you, and I wonder what you're going to learn from me.
Okay. Yeah. I'm interested to hear your take. I don't know if you have time to give it now or if we have to save it for later. With Facebook changing their name to Meta. I'm interested on your take on that. And if you've been shown anything, or if you have any questions about that the creator has.
So that's actually, I don't have a take on it. So at this point, I inherited Ben Thompson's take, the guy I mentioned before. I think in some other context. He wrote a wonderful piece on Meta. He actually did an interview with Zuckerberg, which is interesting that he was the guy that they chose, a random independent blogger living in Taiwan, which is very meta in its own way. So the best take I have, so what I'll do is I have a bunch of links I mentioned. I'll just add those to the YouTube video. And so you can look them up there and paste them in if you want. And I don't spam your email otherwise. And yeah, there's an interesting, we could do a whole episode after we could actually, that's another, I wonder if we might be able to use that as a framing device, because Zuckerberg reinventing his company to create this thing called the metaverse, and us talking about it, is very meta on so many levels in this context of what is identity, right? Because you can make a case that the reason Zuckerberg is doing this is he has a very strong perspective on the nature of identity. And that is, and I'll send you the link. And so that's not a bad framing background. So I don't want to bury you with too many links. Most of these things are fairly short.
This Ernie, you're not bearing me with anything. Whatever I send friends stuff all the time. They'll be like, oh, and a lot of times they'll text me back and say, oh, thank you for that. People that I didn't even think, I wasn't sure would even get anything out of it.
Yeah.
So if you ever have anything that you think, oh, I think Elijah might like this, just send it. And you're not hurting me by saying I can open it up when I need to.
And just so it's clear, it's like, if you want to read it, it's fine. If you want to skim it, it's fine. If you want to ignore it, that's fine. I want, one of the rules, one of the guidelines is like, hey, we are here to be emotionally present. And if you can do some reading and homework at a time, great. If not, you're still fully welcome. You will not be shamed for not doing the homework. And conversely, like, and I was just talking about this in my other podcast, like, if you send me a 700-page book, I'm probably not going to read it. And it's like, as long as you're okay with the fact that I'm okay with that, then we're good. We can keep moving forward. I had one friend who would get deeply offended that I wouldn't read the stuff he sent.
Oh, wow.
Because it was, his identity was tapped up in, was tied up in his reading. And like different people, you feel like there's different gradations of identity that are associated with different things and different levels of grace around that. And I think the key is we want to make sure that our level of grace is catching up to our level of identity in these conversations. We don't
that's right.
Deficit, because that's when we get a blow up.
That's right. That's right. That's right. I couldn't agree with you more. So we can end it there. I know you got your daughter's birthday party to consider. And so I just want to say thank you so much. You're always, honestly, Ernie, always an honest.
Thank you so much. So I have the action item to write this up, post it on YouTube, send you a bunch of links.
Okay.
And then recover and catch up on other things. And then, once I sort of catch my breath and feel in a place of peace again, I'll ping and say, hey, okay, I'm free now. Let's pick a time.
Okay.
So until then, I've discovered if I set a time, I'll feel anxiety, and I'm trying to avoid unnecessary anxiety.
Don't want that.
I'm trying to create necessary anxiety at the right time.
Exactly. You know what? That's a word for me for the day. That's a thought for me. Yes. Thank you so much.
That's an even better title, is necessary anxiety.
Okay.
I may go with that. We'll see what happens.
Okay.
All right. Okay. God bless you. Talk to you later.
Likewise. Take care. Thank you so much, Ernie. Have a good weekend.